The moment Ferdinand walked away from her and closed the door behind him, Myne burst into tears. It was over. They were over. There really was no way to go back to what they had once been, was there? She loved him just the same as before, but how could she ever forgive him after this?
Ask anything of me, Myne.
He'd said, his breath hot against her skin. Had he been asking her to name her price before he took her? Had he been admitting to desiring her body but not her heart? If so, she was glad she sent him packing, because there was no way she would ever accept from him anything other than payment of the same kind. She wanted his heart, and she wanted nothing short of the love and devotion she had grown up seeing at home with her own parents. Yet, yet the prospect of living a life without Ferdinand, because she wanted all or nothing, was horrible to her. What was she to do without him now? She was so alone and heartbroken, and nothing in all the books she had ever read, or the movies she'd watched, or the songs she'd ever heard in both lifetimes could help her deal with her broken heart. Suddenly, some lines of poetry from her Urano days came to her unbidden.
Must I forever long for him with my whole heart till life ends?
Myne burst into tears again, hating her traitorous heart. For how could it be that even though he'd taken such liberties with her, and then turned around and hurt her in indescribable ways, all she truly wanted was for Ferdinand to come back and hold her again? It was during this most unfortunate revelation that Rosina and Delia came in. They were alarmed to see her in such a state, and they rushed to her immediately. They had meant well, but since they kept asking what was the matter and kept trying to comfort her, Myne had banished them out of the room and locked the door behind them. Something she'd never, ever done before. But she was tired of holding everything in. She needed some space and some time before returning to normal. After all she had endured, and after keeping everything in for such a long time, wasn't she entitled to a bit of privacy, especially now that all her hopes and dreams had been so cruelly shattered? The storm, much like Myne's tears and tumultuous feelings, raged on for a bell after Ferdinand's departure, until at last it abated into a light shower. Likewise, Myne could only cry and wallow in misery for so long, and after hours in bed, mulling the incident over and over in her head, she concluded that she had been a fool. She had initially wanted Ferdinand to do whatever was in his power to have Sylvester rescind his order. It was imperative that they save her friends and businesses after all. Yet in the heat of the moment she'd forgotten it all. Caught up in the thrill that came with holding Ferdinand in her arms, feeling his warmth and the weight of his body on hers, intoxicated by his fever-inducing kisses on her neck, she'd made the most colossal blunder of her life. When he'd asked her to name what she wanted in return for access to her body, as she supposed nobles did during such times, she had asked for his love when she should have been asking for the world instead. Myne put her hands over her face and groaned in mortification.
Fool! I'm such a fool!
And now that she saw the error of her ways, she knew that she actually didn't want to see Ferdinand after all. In fact, she rejoiced that, after all this time, he'd never come to her unless she summoned him. How convenient! Now she'd never have to look at him if she didn't want to. They could avoid each other from now on, and life would return to normal after some time. He'd be like the sun, powerful, radiant, and with an irresistible pull. She would be like a planet orbiting around him, a hapless, icy, demoted dwarf planet at that, and forever doomed to be under the influence of her distant star. As to her particular problem regarding her business and her salon friends, well, she'd have to take matters into her own hands. Schlafdrum did not grace her with his blessing that night, and that was fine by her. She sat down on her desk, lit a lamp, and began drafting plans for the future. If she was to live her life without Ferdinand to catch her before she fell, Then she'd have to learn to solve her own problems, clean up her own messes, and take ownership of her mistakes, as an adult should. As to love, Myne put down her quill and sighed. She looked out the window out of habit, only to be met by the dark night on the other side of the glass. She always sought answers in the clouds and the sky above her whenever she had to ponder a difficult situation, but as it was raining outside, all she saw was the faint reflection of her face upon what was essentially a dark mirror. She looked pale and thin, sad too. Apparently, that was what love did to people, and if that was the case, then she didn't want it. That night, she made a solemn vow to never again beg for love. What's more, whether the future involved a political marriage or an informal union like the one she had with Eckhart as a mere water goddess, then she'd make sure to never let love be part of the equation. What's more, she vowed to do whatever it took to make Ferdinand be the one to beg for her love instead. And when he asked her again to name her price, she'd ask for the world and show him that she had now become a proper noble who claws and snatches and grasps at opportunities to get ahead of everyone else. The faint sound of second bell rang in the distance. It would soon be time for Delia to come in to warm the room and prepare her for her bath. Myne put down her pen and rubbed her tired eyes. It was time to start her day, and she should probably unlock the door for her attendants to come in. But as she passed her mirror on her way to unlock the door, something caught her eye, and she stared in wide-eyed horror at the marks on her neck. 4 bruises were beginning to form down her neck. Marks of Geduld, as they were called here, were considered blatantly erotic in a society that was so standoffish that the most innocent of touches, like hand-holding, were reserved for moments of deep intimacy and closeness. But that wasn't the only problem. She had attendants who bathed and dressed her every day. What would Rosina and Delia think if they saw those marks on her neck? They weren't idiots. They would know exactly who had given them to her and when. And Myne's face burned with embarrassment at the thought of having to explain the marks. And finally, how could she put the events of last night behind her if she had to continually see the reminders of the man she loved on her body? She let out an angry groan and threw herself on the bed to scream into a pillow. I'm assuming that was you screaming, Yukihime.
Into a pillow.
Oh, okay.
That
was
that
very
was so
high-pitched.
cute.
That's so cute. All right. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, which put an end to Myne's histrionics.
My lady,
Said Delia.
could you please open the door?
Myne sat up. No. Oh no. What was she going to do? She did the only thing that she could think of. She told her attendants she wanted to be alone and refused to open the door for the remainder of the day until eventually hunger and her attendants' deep distress and worry over her won out. Plus, she had work to do, and it was imperative she meet with Bernard as soon as possible. With deep mortification, she allowed Rosina and Delia to come in to attend to her. They fed her and fussed over her. They lit the fire, straightened the room, and prepared her bath. But the moment they stripped her clothes, their eyes widened in shock at the marks on her body. Delia even gasped loudly before covering her mouth. It was a terrible shock to them both, and as their faces went pale, mine went crimson. But then, bless them both, they finally got over their shock, averted their eyes, and carried on as if they'd seen nothing. And that was that. Life went on. Outside of her chambers, she had to deal with the pressing matter of her tea shop's demise, drafting and finalizing contracts with lower city shops, something that needed her urgent attention now that her various workshops were preparing for winter handiwork, and entertaining Eckhart in the evenings. All that, on top of work she already had to do every day. Though, much to her own shame, she left everything related to the scholars and their work to Lord Bernard. She just couldn't face Feline. Not now. Not when she hadn't yet made any significant progress. Myne found herself avoiding the girl despite the fact that they lived under the same roof now. To make up for it, however, she ordered her attendants to see to her every comfort, and even saw to it that she had a proper wardrobe. Feline was a very pretty girl, and with the right accessories and clothes, she looked like such a darling angel. Myne sighed as she looked over the articles of clothing that came in from Karina's shop. Even though they were ready-to-wear articles, with wide seam allowances that were sold at the Gilberta Company, and that would need some adjusting so that they would properly fit Feline's slender frame. The clothing was beautifully crafted and perfectly suited for Feline's lay noble status. Myne nodded her approval, thanked Otto and the shopgirl that had brought them over, and then had her attendants take the clothing up to Feline's room.
Too bad about her and Roderick. I really wish those two had worked out.
Myne mused as she saw the attendants take the boxes upstairs. She'd always thought Feline and Roderick would make such a cute couple. Roderick was a quiet young man who was very serious about his work. Feline, in contrast, was so adorably earnest and sweet that Myne somehow felt that she wanted to protect her at all costs. Was that what Roderick felt too? Myne had seen many times how Feline's grass-green eyes strayed to Roderick whenever she felt particularly nervous or unsure. And despite the fact that Roderick was usually stern-faced when he was at work, his entire expression always softened whenever he was with Feline. They were so young and so sweet together, and Myne had wanted to help them out in any way she could, but it had all been in vain. Alone as she was, now that she had dismissed all her servants, Myne burst into tears right then and there. When it came down to it, it wasn't her failed tea shop that hurt her. She and Frida would rally again and think of some other way to make money. It was the people she'd failed to protect that hurt her the most. It was the two young hearts, torn forever apart, that cut into her own heart as nothing else could. Why wasn't anyone willing to help her? Not Lord Bernard, not even Eckhart had agreed to send out a few ordinances. Who was she to rely on if not for them? She pondered over the problem so long that most nights she just couldn't sleep for worrying. So on the day that Eckhart came to her and told her that Ferdinand had summoned her for a meeting, her first reaction was relief and joy. If no one else could help her, then Ferdinand would. He might call her a fool, and they might have a few personal issues between them, but he always heard her out, and he always proposed a solution that somehow worked, so that she got the results she wanted, despite the barriers and limits of this world she lived in now. However, her joy was short-lived, because dread and fear took its place. She could not see him. She could not ask anything of him, not after that night. Myne's hands reflexively went to her neck. The bruises might be gone now that Eckhart had cast a healing spell on her, but to her they still remained as bright red as ever, invisible to the eye, but not to her memory. Ferdinand's mark, undeniable evidence of his desire for her, or at least for her body. She was so lost in her own little world that at first she failed to hear Eckhart as he prattled on and on. But then she heard a string of words that brought her back to reality.
Excuse me? What did you say? Eckhart, can you please repeat what you said?
Eckhart gave her an amused grin.
Shocked? That much, huh? Well, it's true. Lord Ferdinand has said that Up Ehrenfest has rescinded his order, and your salon ladies and their families will now be able to return home after all.
Eckhart went on to say about how she needed to keep quiet for now, and that it would take a while until everything was settled. But she didn't care about that. It didn't matter if it took a day or a month. Lord Sylvester had changed his mind, and everything would work out in the end after all.
Myne, what's the matter? Why are you crying?
Eckhart said with shock as he offered her a handkerchief.
I thought you would be pleased.
Oh,
Myne said, wiping her eyes.
no, you don't understand. These are tears of joy. I'm so glad. You have no idea how happy you've made me.
I see. Well, I suppose I will never fully understand you, woman.
Eckhart said with a sigh.
But I'm glad that you are happy. It's good to see you smile once again.
And in a gesture that was now becoming very familiar to her, he gently placed his hand on top of her head and let her cry until she was done. End of chapter. All right. So, fun fact. I was scouring the internet for poems in Japanese because I wanted, I don't know, I wanted a little Japanese touch here. And have you guys heard of the game Karuta? Karuta. So I was watching Shifaya Furu, the anime that deals with Karuta playing, and I heard this poem. I was like, wow, what an interesting poem, what a lovely poem. So I inserted it right there. So yes, the lines of the poem I remembered from her Urano days came from the classic 100 poems by 100 poets that I usually read in Karuta. The full poem roughly translates to this.
So to be fair, mine kind of touched on Karuto in the main story.
Yes.
Because she reinvented that for this world.
Yeah, I wanted to bring it back a little bit, just the original poems, because I think this is from my deep understanding and knowledge of Japanese culture that is from animes that I have watched. They encourage kids to like learn some of them because they're such classics. So I imagine that they kind of like one of them must have stuck with her, and this was it. So the full verse is, after one brief night, short as a piece of the reeds growing on Naniwa Bay, must I forever long for him with my whole heart till life ends. So in the first draft of this,
That's a good one.
yeah, it's beautiful. In the first draft of this, I actually had the lines in Japanese, but before this reading, I went back to change them to English. That way nobody would have any problem reading them. But yeah, I think it's better though that way.
What? We never had any problems saying words in other languages.
Well, next time you can read all the words in all the different languages.
Oh, you just got to call me out, don't you?
Yes.
Call my bluff.
No problem. I will read any Japanese you want.
Oh, I see Red. Nice. I see Red was here with us a little bit ago. Red, if you're listening, hello. How are you? We miss you. Come back to us. We need your memes. I mean, we need your presence. Yeah. So let's.
We need both.
Yes. You're right. That's the right answer. So that was chapter 26, I believe. 26. The next chapter is 27, called A Difficult... title is A Difficult Choice. It's a Eustace POV. Summary. Ferdinand is going to kill himself with overwork, so Eustace takes matters into his own hands. Loving Eustace. Let's see what he comes up with. All right. Chapter 27. A Difficult Choice. Eustace. Traditionally, it was Lasfram's job to greet Lord Ferdinand's guests at the door. But today, Eustace took it upon himself to meet Myne when her carriage rolled up to the mansion at exactly third bell. It was a gloriously sunny morning, blessed by the golden rays of Shutsaria, that should have cheered the hearts of all after the countless days of rain. But Lasfram, who stood by Eustace's side, was anything but cheerful. Eustace could see the hidden anxiety under his friend's mask of composure, so he tried to reassure him with a nod and a confident smile.
This is for the good of our master.
Yesterday, after Lasfram, Eckhart, and Eustace had left Lord Ferdinand in his darkened office, Lastram had broken down and shared with him his worries and the anguish he suffered as he watched their master go at it for days without rest.
He hasn't properly slept or eaten. It is like he is deliberately pushing himself to exhaustion, and I fear that my lord will kill himself at this rate. I just feel so helpless.
Lastram's voice had faded toward the end of his plea. He was in a difficult position. Being a mere lay noble attendant who chiefly oversaw the matters of the home, Lastram was unable to make Lord Ferdinand do anything he didn't want to do, and so had appealed to his fellow retainers, both of them archnobles, to try their hand or to think of ways to help their master. Eckhart had promised to return after his meeting with Myne and force his way, if necessary, to Lord Ferdinand's study to help him finish the paperwork, while Eustace had planned to immediately compound more medicines and potions.
But this won't be enough, will it?
The three of them had agreed that something was ailing their lord. Something was clearly pushing him to seek oblivion among mountains of work. They'd seen this once before when their master had been afflicted with a sickness of the heart. Eustace believed that this time it was born from the fact that their master was terribly worried about his older brother and was probably feeling guilty at not being able to do more for Lord Sylvester. If that was indeed the case, Eustace reasoned that there was no potion that he could ever craft that would help soothe and comfort their lord. But maybe someone else could do what neither Eckhart, Lastram, or he himself could do.
Maybe.
It was a very risky move, and Eustace agonized over it throughout the day and late into the night as he weighed his options. Against his better judgment, Eustace ultimately decided to take it upon himself to do something that might displease their master and would test the lethal limits of their name-sworn pact. Eustace had never dared to think of doing such a thing since he'd sworn his name to Lord Ferdinand all those years ago. But the fact remained that Lord Ferdinand would never ask for help, so he would have to ask it for his master. And so, on that sunny morning when Lord Ferdinand was to meet with young Myne, Eustace was on a mission. He'd be the one to lead her up to the room designated for that day's meeting. And on their way there, he would drop a few words, hint at their master's condition, and leave it to her. Knowing her, she would then march into that room, and just as she had always done at the temple, she would then bully, bribe, or blackmail their lord into eating something and resting. Their master might grumble and complain, but ultimately he'd listen to her. Lord Ferdinand only ever listened to Myne after all, and Eustace was sure that despite a few months of separation, their bond of friendship remained as strong as ever, and their lord would finally listen to reason.
Right?
He prayed to the gods that be the case. Myne's carriage stopped at the foot of the stairs to the mansion. The carriage door opened, and Eckhart emerged. Then he turned and helped a lovely young lady wearing a rose and yellow gown alight from the carriage. Eustace stiffened in shock. Was that revelation of loveliness Myne? He couldn't believe it. Since her move to the noble's quarter, Eustace had seen Myne on occasion, though never so often or regularly as Eckhart now did. With all the ruckus that had gone on in the noble's quarter, and then in the castle with Lord Sylvester's poisoning, it seemed like it had been many months rather than mere weeks since Eustace and Myne had last met and talked. Yet how could it be that after only a few weeks she transformed into that? Her form was just as graceful as it had ever been. Her feminine charms as enticing as ever, but her movements were far more elegant, perhaps due to her time spent with Lady Elvira and the other ladies of her salon. Yet the change in Myne was not just in how she carried herself with more refinement. It was... Eustace couldn't place his finger on it at first, but as he saw her stride forward on Eckhart's arm in that rose and yellow dress, it dawned on him that the trappings of nobility no longer looked out of place on her. In fact, her dress was a perfect representation of her own transformation. Just as its colors were evocative of how the yellow afterglow of Shutsaria's protection in the autumn fades and gives way to the colors of the season of Geduld. So did Myne seem to be maturing out of her autumn and stepping into the full adult maturity of winter. The change was surprising, to say the least. While at the temple, Myne had had a sparkling beauty and energy that seemed to be barely under control. Even in the first few days of her life in the nobles' district, her vivacity somehow clashed with her fancy nobles' clothes. The clothing had been made to accentuate her feminine form, yet because of the sheer quantity of the fabric, it also restrained her movement and gave her an overall odd impression. It had been a little absurd to see young Myne, a small-framed commoner girl, trying to wear clothes that were so obviously wearing her instead. When she put on when she put on the finery, ordinarily reserved for a woman of far greater status and poise, those clothes had simply looked like an ill-fitting costume. But now her movements were graceful and fluid, despite the yards and yards of heavily embroidered sleeves, skirt, and train. But that was not all. Her beauty was now more ethereal than sparkling. She looked more subdued and far more delicate, and her hauntingly beautiful golden eyes were the first thing most saw on a face so abundantly blessed by efflorime. Everything about Myne was breathtaking. Eustace sighed at the cruel twist of fate that had led to his master loving a young woman like Myne, who only saw Lord Ferdinand as a good friend and a mentor. It occurred to Eustace that, after seeing her today, his master might never be free of her spell. For a brief moment, Eustace second-guessed himself and his mission, but ultimately he decided to throw caution to the wind and go ahead with it. He'd bear the burden of responsibility for what might happen next. After all, by this point they were all desperate. They were all as good as dead anyway if their master climbed the greater heights because of overwork.
If there is anyone in this world that would get through to Lord Ferdinand, it will be her. No one but she has the power to sway him and save him from his self-destructive tendencies.
And so, when they reached the grand foyer, Lasram took Eckhart aside on some kind of pretext, while Eustace and Myne continued and went on ahead to the room where Ferdinand waited for her. He didn't have to say much, so he was as brief and succinct as possible, never once thinking that it would be far more risky to leave his master at the mercy of young Myne. Unfortunately, even though he was a gifted scholar with keen insight and a sharp eye for detail, Eustace had yet to learn the truth about the nature of their relationship. However, the way she came out of that room, barely able to hold on to her tears, did much in the way of showing him that perhaps it was time to reconsider his previous assumptions about Myne and where her heart truly lay. End of chapter. Notes. Next chapter, Ferdinand POV and his meeting with Myne. Thank you, JC Fergie, for proofreading. Sounded familiar, Fergie? All right, so let's... Right? A lot of these chapters, you guys, they say the same thing at the end. Thank you, Fergie, for proofreading. Because Fergie did me a real one. Like, he would... Okay. I would, like, just write these incredibly, like, long-winded things. And I'd be like, hey, Fergie, do you want to proofread my stuff? Yeah, so he put some order to the chaos, so thank you for that.
Round of applause for Fergie!
Yay!
Fergie will proofread every fanfic in the server.
Oh, I don't
Hey
want
now, let's not make those sort of promises.
Yeah. But if
I
you're...
have one
boy,
coming
so-
along that
so-
I need proofread, I'm just saying.
Oh, Teal. I also want to be one of those. Let me be a...
Okay.
Okay, she has a secret... What's a secret? Yeah, secret fanfic, secret project that I think
Secret
it's...
story.
Yeah. I'm so looking forward to it. 2, 3, let me just... 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. I got them all. Oh man, there's a lot of talking here. I mean, a lot of narrating. I should have put more dialogue. And that's basically, that was because I was still pretty new at fanficking, so that was my writing style. I didn't put that many dialogue. I would just do like a narration. So eventually I put a little bit more narration. So more back and forth exchanges. I mean, more dialogue. But for now, we'll make do with what we have. It'll get better, I promise. Getting some water. All right, everybody. Let's do the last chapter. It is the longest chapter we've read so far, but with good reason. It's an important chapter.
I don't know. There was that one chapter that we had to split into 2 readings.
Oh, that's true. But that was only 15 slides each reading, and today's reading is 20 slides in total. So, yeah. All right. A Game of Pretend. Ferdinand. Summary. Ferdinand and Myne meet. Myne makes sure to drive a hard bargain and also manages to get a bit of revenge while she's at it. Oh, I should have deleted that part. I changed that. Anyway, oh well.
You fool.
By the way, tracks for chapter 28. For this one, I actually wrote this while listening to the Jane Eyre soundtrack, which is absolutely chef's kiss. Jane Eyre 2011 version. So if you ever want to know what was going on in my mind when I was writing this, just listen to that soundtrack on loop. It's a good one.
And since she is shilling for Jane Eyre, let's shill for her channel. Like, subscribe, join the Ko-fi.
Yes, thank you. Please do so. Not because I said so, but because of these fine folks who...
It's because she wants the money.
Okay. Yes, everybody wants money. Okay, let's do this. Chapter 28. A Game of Pretend. Ferdinand. Ferdinand waited for Myne in a room of his house that had always been intended as a formal meeting room, but which he rarely used in the past. It was a spacious room, lined on one side by large west-facing windows. Much like all the other rooms in his house, it was sparsely decorated with only the bare minimum requirements needed for its purpose. In fact, it just held a long, polished dark wood table where many people could sit, though at this moment, there were only 2 chairs. Ferdinand's at the head of the table, where he now sat while he worked and waited for third bell to strike, and Myne's at the other end of the long table. In front of her chair, several documents and contracts waited for her perusal and hopefully approval. His head throbbed, and as he worked, he fought against the feeling of nausea that came along with these damned headaches of his. But this meeting could not wait. It was imperative that they talk about the future, her future, and all the arrangements that would have to be made for her going forward. Myne had asked for many things. First, her own print shop. Then she wanted to salvage her tea shop. And she wanted to be able to make her own products. And what was it that Eckhart had said? Ah, yes, she wanted to have a say in how they would be produced and sold. Of course, this wasn't the lower city that she had grown so accustomed to. She couldn't enjoy the exact same freedom she had enjoyed when she had been a mere merchant. But after consulting with Charlotte and Sylvesters scholars, he had managed to get Myne the closest thing possible to the control she sought to have. And with terms so overwhelmingly favorable to her, there was no way she could balk at the contracts he'd prepared for her today. He hoped not, anyway. He had worked quite hard over many nights to wrangle these kinds of concessions from their scholars, using his leverage as the one that was currently keeping Sylvester from dying and the duchy from collapsing to wrest that kind of control. All things considered, young Myne, as Eustace was so fond of calling her, was now a very powerful woman indeed, and she stood to gain a financial standing that would rival that of the wealthiest of archnobles. Myne arrived at last. He felt her before she even entered his house, and he felt her as she made her way up the meeting room. He should not have been surprised at her arrival, Yet his heart inexplicably thundered inside his chest, and he struggled to breathe when he set his eyes on her. She was a vision of loveliness. How could it be possible that she looked even more beautiful than the last time he'd seen her? It was physically impossible. He was so caught up in raptures over her appearance that for a moment he was too distracted to notice that she was strangely unaccompanied. He frowned as he saw her enter the room alone and then close the heavy door behind her. This was improper. Myne should have brought in Eckhart, along with a scholar, or some other attendant of sorts. But by this point he was too exhausted to bring it up. Regardless, this was a business meeting, and if she had chosen not to bring a scholar to advise her, then it was none of his business. It seemed Myne understood his intent to keep his distance from the way he'd set things up, so she did not come near him and stayed on her side of the room. They both exchanged formal greetings and then she sat in her chair. From there, they started to talk at great length about the contents of each contract. She asked plenty of questions, and the way she negotiated showed him that when it came to business dealings, she did not need a protector figure like Eckhart or a scholar to advise her. She was more than capable on that score. She had even gone to the length to ask about a timeline for bringing back the families that had been banished from the city. Ferdinand somehow skirted completely answering the question. He couldn't tell her that Sylvester was still submerged in his Jareve. No one but the Ob had the ability to change the magic of Ehrenfest so that those people would once again be able to enter the city boundaries. But Ferdinand assured her that he'd see to it that they were back home well before autumn ended.
I don't know how, but I'll find a way to make that happen.
At that thought, his head gave a painful throb, but he gritted his teeth and carried on despite the discomfort. After Myne perused all the contracts, she began to sign them one by one, and each burst into flames. As the last of the contracts was engulfed in magic golden flames and vanished, the meeting drew to its natural close. All in all, it had been a satisfactory meeting, if a little stiff and formal. Furthermore, it seemed that they'd both come to a tacit understanding to never talk again about what had happened, and he thought it for the best that they let it go. He was just relieved that it was all over and that things had been resolved to her satisfaction. With that incident behind them, Myne would finally be able to carry on with her life, and he with his. Maybe, in a few years' time, they might find it easier to be as open as they had once been. But returning to how things had been between them was now completely out of the question. Still, how could it be that he had let the relationship come to this? His heart ached almost as much as his head did. He took a deep breath and pushed with great effort to settle his mana as waves of emotion overtook him. What a wreck he was. Maybe it was time to listen to Lasram's constant appeals to take some rest. Maybe now that the most pressing matters had been seen to, he could take a short nap. Though he had to go to the castle first. He needed to check on Sylvester, as well as see to the progress that his scholars had made on that.
What the?
In the short span of time that Ferdinand had been lost in thought, Myne had made her way to his side of the room, and then knelt next to his chair. He silently gasped, surprised to see her so close. Now that she was much closer to him, he was struck anew by her blossoming beauty. However, her beautiful face was marred by the worry etched into her fine features. Even her golden eyes were full of concern as she looked up at him. At last she spoke.
Ferdinand? Are you alright?
He flinched before replying.
Myne, what are you doing? Get up. This is unbecoming behavior.
I know.
She said without moving from where she knelt.
I only want to make sure you're well. You had me sit so far away from you, and I just wanted to take a proper look at you before I left.
Sighing at her unneeded sympathy, Ferdinand raised a hand to his head while tapping his temple.
Why
Well, your voice sounded like you're dying. If I had closed my eyes, I'd swear I was listening to the death rattles of an old man.
She thrust her face up close to his as if to inspect him.
It's only now that I'm looking at you closer that I can see that you're more than just a little paler than usual. You look awful.
The last words came out with unshielded distaste. Ferdinand wanted to laugh at her bluntness, but all he did was sigh and cradle his head in one hand.
Not you too. I assure you, I'll take some rest once I'm done here.
She eyed him shrewdly, like the expert negotiator she was.
And you'll eat too?
I'll try.
He couldn't promise what he couldn't do. He was fighting waves of overwhelming nausea even as they spoke. Myne's eyes only narrowed as she spoke.
You know, you owe me, right?
He blinked repeatedly, so surprised was he at her words. They'd been talking about his health, and now she had veered the conversation into dangerous territory and was instantly on the defensive.
What do you mean?
Myne sighed and looked away.
A few days ago, you came to my house for dinner and several things happened. Most memorable of all was how you took liberties upon my person. You even left marks. I suppose it didn't mean much to you since you don't remember, but to me it meant a lot, and I had to endure such mortification because of it.
Ferdinand's eyes went to her slender neck, where he imagined he could see the faint, telltale signs of that night when he'd been under the influence of Bookworm. Gods, Eckhart had been the one to cast healing magic on her. Had he actually believed a ridiculous story of hers? Ferdinand had been beyond mortified when he learned of it, and even now his face was beginning to feel the warmth of Geduld. She was right. He indeed owed her. The fact remained that even though he'd given her almost all of what she'd asked for in the contracts they'd just signed, he knew that it was not even close to enough to make up for the appalling way he treated her. But he also balked at the possibility that she would once again talk more nonsense about wanting his love. He had learned from his mistake. But that left him at an impasse. How could he ask her what she wanted from him without risking that terrible response? How could he find it in himself once more to turn her down, especially now that he was so very tired and his body was screaming for comfort and relief from the stress, exhaustion, and pain from the last few days?
Myne,
He said, stretching out the word with a note of warning.
I know what you're going to say, but let me put your worries to rest. I promise I won't ask you for that again. Sure, you've already made it abundantly clear that it is off the table. But can we go back to what we were before, if only just for a little while?
Ferdinand was silent as he pondered what she was going for. So she continued.
Can we play a game of pretend?
pretend.
Ferdinand said, not understanding her intent. Nodding back in response, he smiled.
Yes, let's pretend that this is your hidden room.
Fool. What manner of game is this?
He exclaimed.
It sounds wildly inappropriate.
Hold on. You didn't let me finish. What are you even thinking? Now, let's pretend that this is your hidden room and it is my second winter in the temple. Do you remember?
Ferdinand frowned, afraid of where this was all going.
I do, but that is not a game I want to play.
Please!
Myne begged, and gave him a pleading look, quivering lower lip included. Ferdinand sighed as he looked down at her face. How did she know? How did she know that, seated at his feet as she was, in the position of a supplicant, she actually held more power over him? When she spoke to him like that and earnestly looked into his eyes, he knew that there was nothing he could hold back from her. She was his mistress, and he was powerless against her. Ferdinand sighed in quiet acquiescence, even though he didn't want to remember that terrible time in his life when unrelenting chaos had descended upon Ehrenfest. A fierce power struggle had ensued, which had eventually led to Veronica's punishment, Bezequon's execution, the purge in the Veronican faction, along with the accidental demise of Sylvester's eldest son, Wilfrid. Of course, Veronica's fall from grace had all happened in no small part because of Ferdinand's own orchestrations, and it was only because of their purge on her faction that he, Sylvester, and Karstid had even been able to weed out those who were aligned with an even greater threat, Georgini. Despite it all, Ferdinand had never meant for Wilfrid to end up as he'd done, caught up in a trap that Veronica had laid out for Ferdinand. If it had made his brother happy, and if it had benefited Ehrenfest in the slightest, Ferdinand would have gladly given up his life in exchange for Wilfrid's. But Wilfrid was a worthless child who had failed spectacularly at his debut, and who had proved to one and all in attendance that he was not fit to be part of the Archduke's family. His demise had only meant that Charlotte, a more worthy child, would now ascend as Ob. While Ferdinand believed that what had happened had ultimately been for the best, it still didn't mean that it had not caused his brother much pain. Sylvester had said he understood. He'd even said that he did not blame Ferdinand for Wilfrid in the slightest. That was all on Veronica for how she had raised him, and then for having set up a trap against a member of the archducal family. Still, the relationship felt a little strained for some years afterward, and despite keeping a strong exterior after the incident, Ferdinand had been devastated and torn up inside. He began to punish himself by taking on loads and loads of work from his brother whenever available. Everyone around Ferdinand, both in the castle and in the temple, had been unable to do anything about it, and everyone suffered as a result of the much heavier workload, including 8-year-old Myne, who had protested because her reading time had been shortened as a result of all the extra work, and who had taken it upon herself to drag out the truth from him and even given him a good talk in his hidden room. Ferdinand was suddenly called back to reality by the fact that Myne was no longer kneeling on the ground, but was now settling herself into his lap. What's more, she was drawing him into a hug.
It was not your fault, High Priest. It was not.
Myne said, repeating the exact words she had once said with a childlike voice. Ferdinand grimaced and tried to push her away.
What are you doing? Get off me, Myne!
No!
She tightened her arms around him.
This is a big squeeze, remember? Have you already forgotten the healing power of a big squeeze? Now hug me back.
Ferdinand attempted to protest their entire situation, but was caught so off guard by this silly game of pretend that he was unable to do anything but sit completely still in his chair, stiffer than a wooden board.
Last year,
Myne said, pretending that they were back in the past.
I was so alone, so much so that I thought I would die. But even though you hated it so much, you still gave me a precious hug time to comfort me, so it is my turn to comfort you. If you don't hug me, this is fine, but please listen to what I have to say.
She was quiet for a moment, as if waiting for his reply. In the end, Ferdinand nodded and let himself be dragged back to that one time when she'd been a tiny 8-year-old demanding to be heard. He remembered almost word for word what she had said at that time.
You were not to blame for the demise of those wicked people. You hear me? You are not. You are not to blame for your nephew either. That was their fault, and the fault of that wretched woman setting traps meant for you. It was wicked men that did the deed in her name. I am sorry for your nephew, but High Priest, I rejoice every day that you were spared. I truly do.
Ferdinand closed his eyes. He was beginning to suspect that there was more to this little game than appeared on the surface. Did she know about the burden that lay heavy on his heart and made it impossible for him to eat or sleep for fear that his brother might climb the towering staircase? Did she know about how guilty he felt whenever he thought about how he could have acted faster or maybe done something that would have brought about a better outcome? Whatever the case, the words she spoke were a balm to him.
Renfest needs you now more than ever.
She continued.
This duchy would fall apart if it weren't for you, and your brother would be heartbroken if you had been the one to ascend the heights instead.
Myne dropped the childlike tone and returned to her normal voice as she veered off script.
But more importantly, more than that, I need you. I need you. Your retainers need you, so please, please listen to me and believe me. We can't do without you, so please take better care of yourself.
Ferdinand heaved a tired sigh.
Because of the benefit I bring to Ehrenfest, right?
Myne loosened her tight hold on him and leaned back so that they were now face to face. Ferdinand saw tears running down her face, but there was anger in her eyes now.
How can you be so dense, Ferdinand? What made you this way? Who told you that your only value comes from what you can do to this duchy?
She poked him in the chest with a finger.
I know you have an unbearably heavy load, but we need you to take care of yourself because we want you to be around for a long time. We need you in our lives. You are loved and valued by many people. So can you please stop working yourself into an early grave?
Ferdinand was silent. Even though he was a mess inside, he felt elated knowing that she still counted herself among the people that cared for him, and just that thought made his heart so much lighter. But he was also feeling a little pathetic, remembering how all his life he'd only lived to serve Ehrenfest. He'd always put himself second to everyone's needs because he had thought that his only value lay in what he could give to Ehrenfest. After all, his own father had only adopted him because of that, and now Myne was changing his world just by those casually uttered words. He swallowed with difficulty.
Myne. Who told you about Sylvester? His condition was supposed to be a secret. Most of the castle staff doesn't even know about the poisoning.
Myne's eyes widened.
Sylvester was poisoned? When? How? Oh, Ferdinand, I'm terribly sorry. Is that why you look so wretched?
Ferdinand ignored how she continued to hyperfixate on his appearance and focused instead on what was more important.
Wait, you didn't know about Sylvester?
No!
She exclaimed loudly.
That's awful! When did it happen? What can I do to help? Oh, poor Charlotte. How is she taking it? Ferdinand, tell me!
Scratching his head, Ferdinand asked in utter confusion.
Then what was the purpose for all this unprompted dialogue? And this little game of pretend?
Well, a little bird told me that you were working yourself to the bone. They told me just how bad it's been. You're not eating, not sleeping. You can't even keep potions down now. I know you. You've only done this once before, so I guess you are going through something similar.
Ferdinand thought over her words. He'd have to figure out which of his retainers was the aforementioned little bird, but ultimately he decided he had no right to reprimand him, especially since he'd actually been the one to accidentally tell her what he'd been so desperately trying to keep secret.
I truly did not know about Lord Sylvester. I promise I'll keep it a secret, so please stop glaring at me. So,
She continued.
Ferdinand.
Her voice became impossibly tender, and she ran a fingertip along his forehead, smoothing out the crease that formed between his eyebrows whenever he frowned or grimaced.
You've been taking it terribly hard, haven't you? You look terrible. I wish that I could help you in some way. Can I do anything for you? Paperwork, a meal, more hugs? Anything?
More hugs.
More hugs is the answer. It's always the answer. Their eyes met as she spoke, and his heart gave a little leap at the closeness of her. So he decided to close his eyes, focusing instead on the soft touch of her fingers as they continued caressing his forehead and eyebrows. He did not immediately reply, for he just wanted to savor the feel of her cool fingertips. How could he tell her that just being with her was like being engulfed by the healing waters of Heilschmerz? Her touch eased much of the tension he'd been carrying all this time, and it made him feel better, so much so that he sighed softly and unconsciously leaned into her touch, ever so slightly, mutely urging her to continue.
Understood.
Myne murmured in his ear, and she shifted a bit on his lap as she positioned herself a little better. Ferdinand's hand strayed to her waist to steady her, but he stopped just short of touching her. Touching her would awaken things and feelings that would be much too troublesome, so he balled his hands into fists and let them drop uselessly to his sides as she continued running her fingers over his forehead. Next, she began massaging his temples in small but firm circles. The sensation was equally painful and pleasurable, and he never wanted it to stop. After long moments of silence, she asked him what had happened at the castle with Sylvester. Gradually, he told her everything as her hands worked their magic. It was as if Fultraine herself was washing away his pains, and once confidential information started flowing from his mouth as if it were trivial bits of common knowledge.
And if it hadn't been because I went over there right after I left you, Sylvester would not even have a chance at survival. It was a potent poison.
I guess it was a stroke of luck that things happened the way they did. Well, did you really think it necessary to talk business with your brother so late at night? What if he'd been sleeping?
Ferdinand scoffed. Sometimes he forgot how fundamentally different their ways of thinking were.
Ha! Then I'd tell his attendant to wake him up. There was no way I was going back to the temple to sleep after that.
He opened his eyes and fixed his gaze on hers.
To do anything else after I had wronged you so completely was absolutely out of the question. You can't believe how sorry I was. I am. Truly, I apologize for everything, Myne.
Myne nodded quietly, accepting his apology. But the next time she spoke, she changed the conversation, and her voice sounded much too cheerful.
Do you feel a little better?
Ferdinand nodded and motioned her to get off his lap. Now that she had gotten what she wanted, she obeyed with alacrity, although it appeared she was not completely done, for she suddenly leaned over and gave him a quick peck on the cheek. He pulled back on reflex and chastised her. She only laughed.
Thank you for hammering me and playing along. I suppose that once we leave this room, we will have to go back to normal.
Indeed.
Ferdinand said.
I think that's for the best.
She took a step toward him and stood so close to his chair that he had to angle his head to look up at her.
But I mean it, Ferdinand,
She said, looking at him with her luminous golden eyes.
Please let me know if I can be of help. You only need to ask.
She paused, and once more she smoothed the frown lines on his forehead.
And please let me know about Sylvester, or if I can do anything to help Charlotte. I know we got off on the wrong foot with the salon business, but I think I can set aside our differences for the common good.
Ferdinand felt relief wash through him. That was one of the things he had still worried about. How to get her to cooperate with Charlotte after all that had happened.
Understood. I'll have Eckhart let you know when we settle on a good time to meet with Charlotte. It's high time you were given the due recognition for all you've done for Interest.
Thank you.
She said softly. A heavy silence fell over them, but they continued to hold eye contact, and as they did, her fingertips moved from his face and forehead to his hair, where she gently raked the tapered ends of her fingertips through his pale blue locks. Despite himself, he closed his eyes and slightly tilted his head further back, seeking more contact. Her touch was more pleasurable than anything he'd ever experienced in his life, and once again he never wanted it to stop. He sighed, breathing in her natural perfume that consisted of her floral-scented soap and the clean astringent scent of her apfelsilge and herbs rincham. He loved that scent. It was familiar and comforting, and as she touched him, he inhaled her and felt an indescribable sensation of well-being wash over him. Tired and exhausted as he was in a particularly vulnerable position, yet he did the unimaginable and let himself go, abandoning himself to her entirely. And that was when she said his name in a soft whisper. He opened his Thank you. He opened his eyes and found her searing gaze on him. The irises of her golden eyes had a slight rainbow shimmer across them. She didn't need to say anything. The desire in her eyes plainly spelled out her thoughts, and he was sure that his eyes also reflected a similar feeling. He looked away from her eyes and settled his gaze on her kissable, plump pink lips. How he yearned for her.
Oh my.
How he burned for his Geduld.
No, I can't be doing this.
He straightened and brushed away her touch. He could not lose himself and make the same mistake again. It would only lead to heartbreak and tears.
Enough. You said you'd drop it.
He reminded her.
I know, I'm sorry.
She said and stepped back a step or two. However, she still looked at him in that way, and he needed her to stop. He cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence that stretched between them.
I have matters to take care of, so unless you've got other questions, then go.
All right, I'm going.
She said, trying to sound happy and careless.
Once I walk out the door, our little pretend game will come to an end. I'll be Myne, the commoner concubine once more, and you will go back to being Ferdinand, the grumpy, stone-hearted High Bishop of Ehrenfest.
Ferdinand heard a tone of finality in her voice, and while he should have been beyond relieved and happy that the meeting's outcome had far surpassed his expectations, a treacherous side of him that was weak and hungered for her touch screamed at him not to let her go and not to let her walk out of the room, at least not until he held her in his arms and begged her to stay with him now and forever. He fought hard for a moment, but in the end he chose to ignore his baser instinct, and he let her go with a final nod of dismissal. She understood, and though she looked somewhat crestfallen, she did not beg or plead or ask him to reconsider. She simply turned and walked to the door. She put her hand on the doorknob and spoke before turning it.
Be sure to send me word through Eckhart about Lord Sylvester's condition, and remember to take better care of yourself, Ferdinand.
She opened the door, but before she stepped out, she smiled to him over her shoulder.
And be sure to lead a happy life. After all, you promised.
She exited the room, and the heavy door closed behind her, leaving Ferdinand once more alone with his thoughts, and the echo of her voice still ringing in his ears. He sat at the table for long moments, reflecting on her last words to him. He had promised to take better care of himself. He supposed the best way to start would be to haul himself off to bed and try to sleep away the headache, which was already beginning to feel better because of her. He'd send Eustace to get an update on the work in the castle, and then, if he was completely recovered, he'd have something light for dinner. Rest, food, and less work. Taking care of those things was simple enough. But the happiness part, he had made no such promise. After all, how could he promise to live a happy life when he had just let the woman he loved walk out the door, taking with her everything that was good in his life? End of part 3.
Once again, Ferdinand, you idiot!
Yes, Ferdinand, our lovable idiot. Yes, but remember, Ferdinand is not canon Ferdinand. He has, on top of his already trauma that we know from before, there was an incident now, and so he's even worse than before.
And we finally know what happened to Wilfried.
What happened to Wilfried? Yeah, and I see Yukihime was also crying when she learned of the Wilfried. Hi Remy also says, I kind of feel sorry for Wilfried now. Yes, he did. He did get, well, it's, I think of all the punishments that Veronica got, knowing that she was the cause behind her beautiful boy's death, that was incredibly huge. So Veronica is still in the ivory tower. We can't kill her off because she has
Did
people.
you do that just to get back at Veronica?
I mean, I had to
She
get her
would never
somehow.
do this.
I deny nothing.
You can neither confirm nor deny.
No, I will confirm. I needed to think of a way to make her suffer, really suffer.
So you really did do that?
I did do it because I am always going to find ways to torture Veronica. Yeah.
This is the dark
And
timeline,
Ferdinand,
so
apparently.
Yeah.
Wow, Magpie got dark.
Oh, come on. That's not dark. That's just...
Dark.
Oh, come on, that's dark.
That's not dark.
this is the dark timeline, Magpie. Be sincere.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Magpie, do you have kotlets?
Huh?
Do you have kotlets? If you are, it's the dark timeline. Everyone needs to have kotlets.
Cutlets?
Yep, for the beard, like this, the side thingies.
I don't.
I was thinking you were saying Colette, like the girl from.
Les Mis.
Les Mis.
No, it's okay.
By the way, there's
My points.
a final note in this one. Again, a million thanks to JC Fergie who proofread and edited this chapter for me. Thank you for the feedback in this chapter. This was a really hard chapter to write, you guys. So again, always thankful for the proofreaders and sounding boards for this one. I think I spent quite a very long time, like a month between updates. So you guys are spoiled. You guys don't need to wait for the for all the updates. By the way, if you are following A World Away and are caught up, I just updated last night. It's a Ferdinand chapter 2, so go and check it out. I'm really, like, I see the finish line. I need more time to write, but it's there. Like, the urge to write and finish the story is there. So I hope to finish it hopefully before November. That way we will be caught up. And by the time this reading catches up to chapter 100, we will already have an ending. So...
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully.
I said hopefully.
Yeah. So this is the end of part 3. As you guys have said before, when I plotted out this fanfic, I didn't really have everything plotted out, but there were some key emotional beats I wanted to hit. So after every one of those beats, it's the end of part 3. So in this case, it's the final last chance, basically.
Almost like a turning point.
Yeah.
It's the final last chance.
Yeah, it's kind of like the last chance. There'll be other interactions with them too, but I kind of felt like this was the time when like it could have been the perfect moment for them to make up and whatever, but you know, life moves on. So it is moving on for both of them. The next chapter is there's no interlude. We go straight into part 4, which happens to be one of the most interesting ones that I've written, I think. So it's not all gloom and doom. Not every single part is gonna end in sadness. Some parts will end in like good parts. So hang in there, okay? If you're finding this super depressing, well, first of all, you're weak. You have to toughen up a little. And
So says the lady
I do
who's
not
been...
want to hear that.
well, okay. There's
Yeah.
people who okay. Let me backtrack. Let me clarify. Yukihime read this when it was still going, and she stuck through it, and she was a champ. She said this is hurting, but she continued reading it. Okay, there were people.
It's still hurting,
Listen.
and I just read Myne's part, and in case you heard me crying because Myne was crying, I was crying in reality.
Oh, that was so
again.
good, Yukihime. You did so good. Yeah, I loved it. Yes, and
Let's just keep in mind that the only reason why she can call us all weak is because she has been tempered by the forge of telenovelas since she was a child.
who? Me? No. No,
Yes.
I did not. Okay, when I was growing up, my parents forbade me from watching telenovelas. You guys know this. I was not allowed to watch telenovelas.
Listen, Magpie. I was forbidden from watching South Park and The Simpsons as a kid. You know what I watched as a kid?
South Park and The
Wasn't
Simpsons. Yeah. Except my mother kept me really busy with extracurricular activities. So by the time I got home, it was like 9 o'clock, and I would just crash. There was no time for telenovelas. I'm telling you, I only started watching telenovelas until like I was maybe like teen, maybe? I don't know. Like I was not forged on telenovelas. My love for drama is absolutely because I am a lover of romance novels, and they have such good tasty angst. Oh, my favorite ones have such good angst, you guys. If you are on want recommendations,
Totally not
hit up a
because the
girl.
buff guy's on the cover.
Oh, that just shows you that you need to read current romance novels. You guys, if you think that romance novels just have Fabio on the cover, let me disabuse you of that. That was in the 80s.
Who said anything about Fabio?
In fact, because he's notorious, his covers are notorious.
You are right about that one.
Just go and check Tender is the Night or something like that. Is that the name of that
Of course,
one?
you actually have a title. You actually have a title.
I think
You just gave yourself away.
No. I'm just saying that in Romanslandia, we even us, we have little, we make fun, or we talk about the phases of romance, and in the 80s and the 90s, it was just very toxic. I would not read, recommend, or anything those books, because there were a lot of very like brutish men and like fainting women and dubious scenarios going on. So nothing from the 80s or 90s.
You know, it's kind of ironic
To be fair.
that all three of those things apply to Bookworm.
And to be fair, in the 80s and 90s, we had Batman the Animated Series, which both boys and girls very much loved for the brooding man that is Batman.
Okay, do not bring that up, because that will take us to another tangent.
But we're done. We're here for the tangent.
I'm just saying.
Now I'm questioning if Batman was his first fictional love.
No, whose fictional love? Everybody's
Patrick's.
Mine!
Patrick's. It wasn't your.
And besides, Batman was just a copy of the Shadow.
I don't even know who the Shadow is. Who's the Shadow?
Boo! Boo! How dare you? That's heresy.
It's true though.
I am looking up all these
I
things
don't-
on Google. The
I
shadow.
don't care how true it is. I do not care how true it is. It's still
Animation,
blasphemy.
Cartoon. The shadow
In fact-
cartoon.
In fact, in case you did not know, the reason Batman doesn't kill anymore, because in his
It's
earliest
because the shadow.
comics, is because they wanted to differentiate him from the shadow.
The shadow.
That's the real reason.
So the shadow did kill. Oh yeah, I see him with a gun.
Yeah, so purple jumpsuit.
And early
Strange eye
Batman
mask.
shot people too.
Does anybody else see similarities between Batman and Ferdinand?
Some, for sure.
Absolutely.
Are you trying to make me fall more in love with him? Come on, dude.
I'm gonna have
So-
to ask Alos. I'm gonna have to ask.
So,
Alos.
so you admit that you love Batman then?
Heck to the yes. I love
mean, she's-
Batman.
Ferdinand Batman.
That Batman, the 90s Batman was iconic, you guys. It was iconic. I don't know anybody who grew up watching it and who doesn't remember. Or
Emotional distance.
it was so
I'm,
good.
But then
going to draw.
it won't
Okay,
work
I'm-
because Batman has a full mask and is gonna hide the hair. How would you make it work?
Oh,
I'll leave that to
Right.
you and her amazing talent to figure out a way. Though,
I will think about it.
do so. All right, we will continue talking about stuff, or probably we won't because we have a Hannelore read along in, I don't know, 1.5 hours. So we probably should end right here. It was a very fun but very long read along, you guys. Want to say thank you to those that read today. We had Myne was read by Yukihime, Delia, Eustace and Last Fram were read by Teal, Eckhart was read by Vincent, and Ferdinand was read by Patrick, and everybody did an amazing job. Thank you so much for reading with me. And
But especially me.
and
Sorry.
and stop distracting me, dude. And of course, just want to say thank you to the peeps on YouTube. Time Lord Boy, happy to see you. Oh, there. Time Lord Boy also says, yeah, Batman cartoon series. Also says the Shadow's a Pulp Fiction character and was based on Zorro. Based on Zorro. Wow. Okay.
And
Zorro
Antonio Banderas-
Antonio Banderas did something to my little heart. I got palpitations in the first Zorro. Oh my goodness. I was like,
Is it?
Catherine Zeta-Jones, you beautiful woman, I hate you.
Listen, many 90s women fell in love with Antonio Banderas because of that movie.
That was a good movie. And I'm guessing more than
Isn't
just
he the
women.
same voice actor for?
Puss in
Isn't he the
Boots.
same voice
Yeah.
actor for? Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was chosen deliberately because of that. Yeah. And the fun thing about it is that he was able to do both the Spanish and the English version, so it's lovely too. Speaking of which, did you know that? Anyway, we should probably end. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you on Wednesday afternoon, 4 o'clock Pacific. Thanks for joining us.
I promise to distract her as much as I did today.
Stop it, or you shall be blocked. Bye, everybody.